Coming up on Arirang News, North Korea says it successfully test-launched long-range cruise missiles over the weekend, the first time it's done so in 6 months. The U.S. says it's aware of the reports and is monitoring the situation. The BOK says the pandemic has knocked the South Korean economy's potential growth rate in the years to come down to 2%. Without the pandemic, it would have been 2.2%. And the health authorities say South Korea is on track for its goal of giving first vaccine doses to 70% of the population by the end of the week, before the start of the Chuseok holiday. 64% is the figure as of Monday. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Data from the Bank of Korea indicate how much the pandemic has impacted the local economy's growth in the years to come. The BOK says that its potential growth rate, meaning the upper limit of growth without causing inflation, will be just 2% this year and next. Without the pandemic, they say it would have been 2.2%. So Eun-Kyung reports.
South Korea's economic growth is being impeded by COVID-19 pandemic-induced contractions. According to data from the Bank of Korea on Monday, the potential growth rate for this year and next has been slashed by 0.2 percentage points to 2% due to COVID-19. Potential growth rate refers to the maximum possible rate an economy can achieve without triggering inflation. The rate has been on a steady decline due to a shrinking working-age population and mounting household debt. However, the pandemic has caused the nation's potential growth rate to decline further.
Potential growth rate is calculated based on the projection of 3 elements: capital input, labor input, and total factor productivity, which largely represent technological improvements. However, as COVID-19 has taken its toll on many aspects of the Korean economy, especially worker participation in the labor market, the pandemic has dragged down the country's potential growth rate by 0.2 percentage points.
The central bank said that to bring Korea's potential growth rate back to pre-pandemic levels, government efforts are needed to minimize the impact on businesses, especially those which rely on in-person interactions, such as those in the service sectors. It also added that it is necessary to secure and nurture new growth industries. Seung-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's exports so far this month are up 30.7% from a year earlier, in large part on petroleum products and cars. But at this point for the month, Korea has a trade deficit. According to customs data, in the first 10 days of September, the country's outbound shipments stood at $19.5 billion. Imports, however, soared by more than 60% on year to $21 billion, resulting in a trade deficit of almost $1.5 billion. Semiconductors accounted for 20% of exports, but the biggest jump was in oil products as the global economy recovers. By country, shipments to China were the biggest, rising by more than 24% on year, while those to the U.S. were up around 45%. The prices of meat and vegetables in Korea, which usually rise ahead of the Chuseok holiday, have actually dropped this year, thanks to an increase in supply. The finance ministry says prices fell for 13 of the 16 items it tracks. Measures were introduced last month to curb prices in advance of the holiday. And within a 3-week period, the price of pork fell more than 13%, and apple prices were down 4.5%. Egg prices, which are still up sharply from a year ago, came down 3.3%. The government's going to monitor the situation, especially because the latest pandemic relief funds, a large part of which will be spent on groceries, could push prices higher. From today, the South Korean government is taking applications in person for its 5th round of pandemic relief funds, which will go out to most of the adult population. These payments are for 250,000 Korean won, or a little over $200 US. Like the online applications, you can apply in person on a day of the week, depending on your year of birth. That starts on Monday for people born in a year ending in 1 or 6, then Tuesday for 2 or 7, and so on. You can pick up a prepaid card or voucher from your local community center. Or if you want to apply online, you can do so regardless of your year of birth through your credit card company or bank. The money can be spent until December 31st at local small businesses and traditional markets. A growing proportion of the world's billionaires are people who did not inherit their wealth but made it in business themselves. Of Korea's 50 richest people, a study finds more than half could be considered self-made. Kim Sung-min reports.
The number of self-made billionaires in some major economies, including South Korea, continues to rise compared to those with wealth that is inherited. A report by corporate research firm Leaders Index gathered data from each of the top 50 wealthiest people in South Korea, the US, and Japan. Among the 150 richest, 98 were self-made billionaires, 6 more than in 2018. South Korea in particular saw the biggest increase in that number, with half of the top 50 being self-made. Though Japan saw a drop in the number of self-made billionaires, it still accounted for more than 70% of the list. All three countries saw more than 10 self-made newcomers from 3 years ago. South Korea saw the most, with 14. This is contrary to its traditional family-based 재벌 social phenomenon, but one expert says it's still too early to determine what this change really means.
What's more important is whether this trend can continue, but such a trend is relatively new. So right now it's too early to conclude whether South Korean society is moving toward a more even playing field for everyone. But one thing's for sure, this will create a social atmosphere that could encourage many startups to feel like they can do it too.
The average age of self-made billionaires dropped in all three countries, with South Korea seeing the largest drop from 61.5 to 56.3 years old. And despite COVID-19, the wealth of the wealthiest grew further. The combined wealth of the 150 richest grew from 1.5 trillion in 2018 to 2.5 trillion US dollars, up 68%. Those who made their own money saw almost an 80% growth, while those with inherited wealth saw 45% growth in wealth. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Chuseok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good afternoon. Thank you for coming on today.
Happy to be here.
Well, let's start with some data from the U.S. Producer prices last month jumped by the highest amount on record, up by 8.3% from the year before. This is the final demand or wholesale figure, and it suggests that prices are going to keep rising. What's behind the jump in producer prices, and where do you see them going?
Okay, well, the reason is accounted for by supply bottlenecks and increases in cost of transportation. There seems to be some indication that the production facilities cannot keep up with increased demand by consumers as the U.S. economy increases vaccination and it approaches normalization, though some anti-vaccine sentiments are limiting the recovery, but producers are prioritizing supply over price, and there does seem to be some indication that the rise in prices may be leveling off. Now, 8.3% is the highest since 2010, and it did rise from last month's figures at 7.8%, but this has taken over 12 months. If you look at just monthly basis from July to August, it only went up by 0.7% as opposed to 1.0% last month. And if you only look at the core PPI that eliminates energy price changes and food price changes, then it was only 0.3%, down from 0.9% in July. Some indications that it's the transportation costs and supply bottlenecks which are responsible. Transportation and warehousing costs rose 2.8% for the month. So in that case, as the Fed has indicated, if coronavirus is under control, then likely the supply bottlenecks and transportation problems will be solved in large extent, which would then mean that inflation would be reduced to normal levels as long as people's expectations of inflation do not change. But the problem is we don't know exactly when the coronavirus will be under control. And if this inflation continues for a long time because of these supply bottlenecks and transportation problems, then people may have built up their inflationary expectations, and that would mean permanent increase in inflation, and no one really wants that. But still, the goal is to get the coronavirus under control as quickly as possible.
Well, stocks on Wall Street on Friday closed lower again, and they were down for the week. The Dow off for 2 weeks in a row, and it was the longest losing streak for the S&P since early this year. At least part of that is the virus and its effect on growth, and also the question of tapering by the Fed. What's the story in the global markets?
Okay, well, Dow and S&P has been continually going down since September 2nd after the disappointing August job report. And NASDAQ has been down since September 7th, which is only 2 trading days later than September 2nd. So they have been affected by the jobs report as well. And the popular analysis of why it's continually going down is that fear that the growth is falling and Delta variant is increasing, so recovery may take longer. And as you mentioned, the fear of tapering. We've seen 10-year Treasury yields rising, bond prices falling. That's usually a sign that the traders are expecting inflation. When the tapering begins, lower purchases of bonds by Fed may drive down prices, so that may be fueling the rise in the yields. Now, Dow is down 2.2% for the week, S&P is down 1.7% for the week, and NASDAQ is down 1.6% of the week. As for the European markets and Asian markets, European markets, DAX, FTSE, CAC have all fallen since September 7th, but they're showing some signs of life today. They've been recovering in early trading. Asia, Nikkei and Hang Seng mostly shrugged off the declines in U.S. and Europe in the last week. They've been rising rather steadily, but Hang Seng of Hong Kong has been up and down, but on a generally downward path. And so far in early trading, they're down as well.
Well, Korean stocks today were mixed coming off of that. The big tech platforms Kakao and Naver continuing their declines from last week, Kakao especially. But chip makers Samsung and SK Hynix bouncing back a little. So the Kospi eked out a gain, but the Kosdaq was down. Tell us about the local market.
Okay, well, Kospi, today there was a lot of volatility, but in the end it was much ado about nothing. It was very much an up and down day. It went into negative in late morning for quite a while, and then after a recovery, went into negative again in early afternoon trading before eking out a tiny positive gain for the day. It ended today at 3,127.86. It went up by 0.07%. But if you look at some of the longer trends, especially by foreign investors, there's some interesting numbers. If you look at the July current account numbers, which came out last week, there was a large decline in foreigners' stock investment on the net, minus $2.1 billion. But there was a large increase in foreigners' private and public bond purchases as well, $10.2 billion. So it seems that foreign investors have not lost confidence in Korea in general, but they may be worried about the stock market. And that pattern seems to be repeating in August. Financial Supervisory Service had a report on August foreign investment last week, and foreigners sold about 7.8 trillion won's worth of stocks and bought 1.7 trillion worth of bonds. And most of these purchases took place early in August, but August was the 4th straight month where foreigners left the Korean stock market, so they seem to be refocusing. Some of the money is going out of Korea, but a lot of the money seems to be refocusing from the stock market to the bond market. That's likely because of rise in Korean interest rates, both last month and expected in the near future, as well as possibility of tapering by the U.S. and the spread of Delta variant. But if you look at which stocks the foreigners sold during those 4 months, it was in large part Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, as well as some popular Korean stocks like NCSoft and SK Telecom, Hyundai Motors. But now they seem to be coming back somewhat into the market in the last few days, and they seem to be buying Samsung Electronics. Maybe they thought that they sold too many of them while they were going out of the Korean stock market. Kosdaq, it was down today. It tried to rally around 10 a.m. and 1 p.m., but did not succeed. For the Kosdaq market, individuals bought, institutions and foreigners sold. It ended today at 1,026.34. It was down 1.11%.
And Professor, this week we'll have monetary data from the Bank of Korea for July, also jobs numbers from Statistics Korea, and in the U.S., retail sales for one thing. What's on your radar in the week ahead?
Okay, well, for Korean numbers, on Thursday, there's a meeting between the head of Financial Supervisory Commission and various Korean financial associations. Right now, the government seems to be very keen on limiting the expansion of household debt, household borrowing. So we'll have to see whether they will continue on that path. There has been a lot of criticism because while the limiting household debt is a very laudable target, they seem to be limiting the borrowing by people who actually need the money for productive purposes as well. On Friday, Ministry of Economy and Finance will have September economic trend report. So we'll see how the economy is going relatively up to date. For foreign statistics, we have U.S. Consumer Price Index numbers coming out on Tuesday, China retail sales on Tuesday as well. On Thursday, U.S. retail sales. So those numbers will help us to see whether the global recovery will continue or fail. And on Friday, there will be U.S. University of Michigan Consumer Sentiments Index to see how the consumers feel about the near future economy.
All right, Professor, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much, as always, for sharing your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
North Korea said this morning that it test-fired long-range cruise missiles on Saturday and Sunday. The regime's last such provocations were 6 months ago, not long after President Biden's inauguration. The North says the launches were successful, and the U.S. says it's monitoring the situation. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
The Pentagon has reportedly broken its silence on North Korea's test launches of a long-range cruise missile amid stalled denuclearization talks with the U.S. Citing a release by the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, the AFP reported Monday that the U.S. criticized the North's missile tests, saying they are a threat to neighboring countries and the international community. The North state-run Korean Central News Agency reported the test firings took place Saturday and Sunday and hit targets 1,000 kilometers away, proving the new strategic weapon's effectiveness and practicality. It reported the missiles traveled for 7,580 seconds along oval and pattern 8 flight orbits in the air above its territorial land and waters. The missiles flew successfully using propulsion power generated by the newly created turbine blast engine and passed technical indicators with flying colors, which included detailed tests of missile parts, scores of engine ground thrust tests, various test flights, control and guidance tests, and warhead power tests. The test firings took place without leader Kim Jong-un present. Instead, senior military official and presidium member of the North's Politburo of the ruling Workers' Party, Park Jong-chun, watched the launch. According to the KCNA, Park said the missiles are another great manifestation of the tremendous capabilities of the North's defense science and technology and the munitions industry. He stressed the need for the field of national defense science to go all out to increase defense capabilities, the war deterrence of the country, and to keep making achievements in meeting the grand and long-term targets of securing war deterrence. Details of the recent launch were not revealed by South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff.
The South Korean military is in close consultation with the US in analyzing the recent test fire.
The recent launches came after North Korea held a scaled-down military parade last Thursday to mark the 73rd state founding anniversary. The test firings of cruise missiles, which unlike ballistic missiles are not a violation of United Nations sanctions. This is the fourth provocation by North Korea this year. The North fired cruise missiles right after Biden's inauguration as U.S. president on January 22nd, as well as on March 21st. It fired ballistic missiles on March 25th. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Today in South Korea, a decline in coronavirus cases, as is usual when the week begins. But on the vaccination front, the authorities say the country is on course to have given at least one dose to 70% of the population by the end of this week before the Chuseok holiday. They're also going to announce a vaccination schedule for people under 18 this month. Choi Won-jong has more.
1,433 new COVID-19 infections reported in South Korea on Monday. As usual, due to less testing done over the weekend, daily cases were down from the day before by around 300. However, Monday's cases were higher than a week earlier. All but 24 were transmitted locally. In a detail, 1,100 cases, or more than 78%, were in the Greater Seoul area. With the Chuseok holiday start this weekend, the health authorities have reaffirmed that without a doubt, first vaccine doses will have been given to 70% of the population before the holiday starts. The authorities said Monday that over 64% of people have gotten one dose already, and more than 39% of people are fully vaccinated. Officials are also projecting that when oral treatments for COVID-19 become available, that will cost around $800. If Korea used these treatments, the government said that will pay for the full cost of the drugs. Possible options are from the pharmaceutical firms like Pfizer and Merck, which are now in the third phase of trials. Meanwhile, the KDCA will announce the fourth quarter vaccination schedule this month, with specific dates for people aged 12 to 17. If the plan gets final approval, those eligible will be getting the Pfizer vaccine, which is the only COVID shot for that age group. Choi Won-jong, Arirang News.
And starting today, South Korea has temporarily eased some restrictions on private gatherings ahead of the Chuseok holiday, when millions of people will be traveling to visit family. Gatherings can be bigger if at least some people in the group are vaccinated. Shin Ye-eun explains.
Authorities in South Korea have launched special virus prevention measures to allow South Koreans to enjoy the holiday season amid the pandemic. For the next 2 weeks, certain social distancing measures will be relaxed. From September 17th to the 23rd, families can gather in groups of up to 8 people, as long as 4 of them are fully vaccinated. If it weren't for this measure, many people would not have been able to go and meet their relatives. Another big change is that in-person visits will be allowed at nursing homes if both the patients and visitors have been fully vaccinated and at least 2 weeks has passed since their last dose. The measures will run from Monday until September 26th. But those who haven't been vaccinated can only greet their families in these facilities online. Authorities have also asked people to pay respects to their ancestors online instead of going to graveyards or memorial halls in person. They've also decided to only sell window seats on trains and have asked people to use their cars when traveling to limit the number of people using public transport. South Korea's Chuseok holiday comes at a time when the greater capital region is under the toughest level of the 4-tier social distancing system. Most other regions are under level 3. Health authorities have asked people to follow virus prevention measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19 over the holiday period. Shin Ye-eun, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says South Korea will aim to lead the world's efforts against COVID-19 and new infectious diseases, reaffirming the country's goal of becoming an international vaccine production hub. He said this on Monday in a recorded video speech to celebrate the opening of the annual Global Bio Conference 2021.
한국 역시 4종류의 백신을 위탁 생산하며 백신 공급에 힘을 보태고 있습니다. 앞으로 5년간 2조 2천억 원을 투자해 백신 생산 역량을 획기적으로 늘리고 코로나 극복에 더 적극적으로 기여할 것입니다.
President Moon pointed out that the biomedical industry has brought hope to mankind in fighting the coronavirus, and he highlighted how cooperation and innovation have enabled vaccines to be developed rapidly. Moon further predicted that the sector will reach new highs by expanding cooperation with new industries like AI and big data. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.